And I think that goes back to what you were talking about earlier. Now is the time when a good narrative and some clear guidance is very helpful. If they were just producing their next gen vehicle and making 4 million cars a year and selling every one of them, then people aren't going to complain about the narrative. They're going to be like, holy crap, this thing's going crazy. But right now we're in that kind of flat spot between these two. And so that's when the guidelines and the narrative
But
helps.
when you're on an
Yeah.
airplane, the pilot doesn't really
Yeah.
talk, but if you hit crazy
Right.
turbulence, he comes
Yeah.
on.
Yeah.
Like, I'm just trying to say,
Yeah.
like, it's the same concept. And again, I'm not saying like handhold,
Right.
but you need to give
Yeah.
guardrails.
Hey, y'all, it's Dr. Know-It-All. I am really happy today to be with Dan Ives, who is Director of Equity Research at Wedbush Securities. We had a chance to hang out a little bit during CES in Las Vegas, and you were generous enough to come on the channel for a little while. And in the meantime, I can see the Mets back there. There's a lot of sports memorabilia back there, so we can talk about that too. Cool. So first of all, thank you. Second of all, I would love, I know on the big finance channels, you know, they're usually like you get in, you got 30 seconds to say your piece, but why don't you start with just like your background? And you're a huge Tesla bull, but like when you became aware of Tesla in your kind of journey through life and why you tend to be so bullish about them. So we can just start there.
Yeah. No, and great to be here. So like, I've covered tech stocks going back to late 90s. You know, started covering software, cybersecurity in the early days, Oracle, and then morphed into Apple, disruptive tech, and look, and really, and once the iPhone launched, and obviously that was really, I think that put us in the map. Just being a huge believer
Right.
in what iPhone was going to do. Right.
Right. Right.
We felt like, you know, just getting to know Musk. I was a huge believer in him individually. So
Okay.
just forget the concept.
Right.
And my view is like you bet on the leaders, and then a lot of times the business models come to form.
Gotcha.
And look, there were a lot of times in those periods, 2013, 2014. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of periods where can they make it?
Right.
Like the capital issues, obviously some of the supply chain, the manufacturing, but ultimately it was look. I like trying to find names where I feel like they're the winners.
Right.
These are the themes. You're going to have disruption in given quarters or, you know, sometimes longer.
Right.
But if you stick with those themes and you do the work, you navigate. And that's
Right.
looking, that's sort of been like how we've done it almost 25 years where we're doing it is just
Right.
being viewed as maybe like, you know, calm sort of, you know, water in like a rough wave type
Right.
environment where
Right.
you're able to like, but look, we're not, but also like not smoke and mirror too. Like we're gonna call like we see it, even like we've done with Tesla,
Right.
because I
Right.
think, but it's also part of like the credibility where
Yep.
you do the work. We spend a lot of time on the road, seeing things, you know, international factories, different, you know, within the supply chain, where you feel like it gives you an advantage,
Right.
or at least some edge that
Right.
I believe
Right.
in terms of calling the stocks.
Did you know that your personal data is being bought and sold online right now? Yes, behind your back, data brokers are busy passing your data around for profit, and this exposes us all to potential harassment, doxing, phishing scams, and even devastating identity theft. But you and I have a right to stay private and protect our personal data. I know I need to protect my online data and privacy rights, but I'm so busy, and frankly, I wouldn't even know where to start. That's where Delete Me, today's sponsor, comes in. Delete Me takes the work out of protecting your online presence by removing you from hundreds of data brokers all year long. It's totally hands-off, so you don't have to do a thing after you sign up, which is great for me and my busy life. Delete Me goes out and finds sites that have your personal data like phone numbers, addresses, email addresses, and so on, and alerts the broker that you wish to have your data removed from their site. And if there's a particular custom removal request you need, just let Delete Me know and it'll take care of that too. Delete Me sends you a privacy report in 7 days after you sign up, letting you know what sites had your data and what has been protected. Better yet, Delete Me is a US-based company and does all the work in-house. And Delete Me will monitor sites all year long and repeat the removal request as needed. I also love how simple Delete Me is to use. You submit your info, experts search for it online, requests are made to those sites to remove your data, and Delete Me sends you a detailed report in 7 days. And it keeps working all year, protecting you from anyone trying to reacquire your data. Be sure to click my link in the description to get 20% off any consumer data protection plan and start feeling safer right now. Thanks to Delete Me for sponsoring today's video. Be sure to click my link in the description to get 20% off any consumer data protection plan. And now let's get back to it. That sounds good. And you know, you're right in the 20 teens, I guess, up until somewhere around 2019, 2020, Tesla it was risky. It was a risky proposition. And I think a lot of people who've kind of come on board lately are like, oh my gosh, they're a behemoth. They make so much money. But what was their first profitable quarter? Was it late 2019 or early 2020? It was not.
Yeah, it was 2019 into 2020.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's not that long ago.
And then when you think about the whole S&P 500 inclusion,
Right.
which is 4 straight quarters profitability, I mean,
Yeah.
that took a while. I mean, that was like 21, 22. So look, it's been a journey, but that's also with Tesla. Like, we spend a lot of time, whether it's visiting Nevada, Fremont, abroad, Austin, just doing the work, right? Because even like when you're in periods like now, it's very easy. And I think it's very easy sometimes, just like with a lot of names, whether from like Nvidia to Amazon to Netflix, it's very easy to kind of get caught up in groupthink, both in the negative as well as on the positive.
Right. Yeah. And what's that? Is it Warren Buffett that says like buy when other people are selling and sell when other people, yeah, you always want to think for yourself, I think is a shorthand for that, and not get caught up too much. So that's amazing. So I guess, well, first of all, do you see a disconnect between Tesla, TSLA, the stock price, and the company? And if you do, predicated on that, why do you think there's a disconnect between the two right now? Because I haven't checked the stock price today. I've been busy, but it's like under 200 right now. So, yeah.
Look, I think there's a few things that are well known that are definitely headwinds, right? Just in terms of like China, the price wars that continue to happen, moderation of EV demand. So those are things that are known.
Right.
But I actually think like 80% of the sell-off in the stock has really been communication. I mean, like, look, now again, it goes back to like, Musk is never gonna be the one that talks about what gross margin ramps look like from 2Q to 3Q.
Right.
But when I think once Zach left in August, there's a void. And to say that there's not a void, that'd be like you thinking the 49ers like won the Super Bowl. Like, the point is, like, there is a void. And I think that's in part of the frustration, where I think a lot of the sell-off, there is a disconnect.
Right.
But without communicating guidance in terms of whether it's price cuts, the margin story, the street will assume the worst. And look, and also other things have happened, like the Delaware issue.
Right.
And then Musk asking for the 25%.
Yeah.
Or else, take AI. So there have been some other things too that I think contributed.
Right. So it's interesting that you think that a lot of it, I know, when you get on there, you always talk about like Tesla, the story, but, and sometimes you think like, no, it's just about the fundamentals. Are they cranking out cars? Are they efficient? But I think it's reasonable to talk about the story because we are human beings, and it's not like you can just wrap your head around like the logistics supply chain of everything that has to do with Tesla or any other stock for that matter. So a lot of it does become how you communicate your story to the public, right? As the obligation of the company itself to do that.
Well, also in a market where like the godfather of AI, Jensen, NVIDIA, Microsoft, SMCI, like the point is like where AI is dominating.
Right.
And a lot of these tech names are just ripping Meta to the other. So it's one where it is a story stock.
Right.
And perception does become reality.
Right.
and especially from an institutional investor perspective, you could have retail. And a lot of times, like online, many Tesla loyalists is part of the back and forth that we always see,
Right.
Yourself included. But you get to a point where like and we talk about getting an adult in the room, like you
Right.
need to give guidelines and signals, right? I know it's like the
Right.
board not doing anything
Yeah.
post Delaware, like not
Yeah.
at least come out with like a statement.
Which
Now
is
we could
interesting. Yeah.
argue,
Yeah.
no, and we could argue, oh, buyback, should they do it or should they not?
Right.
But look at Uber over the last week, like
Right.
phenomenal quarter, communication, the call, unreal.
Right.
Do an investor day, do the buyback, lay out the medium term. The
Right.
stock went essentially from 50 to 80.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm just giving an example where it's important.
Yeah. Yeah. And do you feel like some of that is just a contrarian nature of perhaps Elon himself, but also the company? They're the company that's like, nope, we're not going to advertise, although they have started doing some
Sure.
of that in retrospect. But there's this feeling of like, we're going to do it differently than everybody else. What was that Apple's thing back in the 90s? Think different. They're kind of going with that. And maybe sometimes it goes too far that direction.
Totally. It's
Okay.
like, I think you can do it, but then also still have some conformity.
Right.
Like, it's like, if I decide to drive on the left side of the road in New Jersey,
Yeah, that's a problem.
but you see what I'm saying? Like, it's like, I think it's like in doses, and also it's like it's reading the room.
Right.
Like, it's like you're going through a period where, and Jonas has talked about it, over the last week too. Like, you're going through a period like I can tell you, institutionally,
Right.
sentiment's very negative.
Yeah. Yeah.
And now, granted, like EV moderation demand, but it goes back to the whole like, as we've talked about, the AI story
Right.
could be bigger at Tesla than selling car. Like, just
Yeah.
like when you think about the actual business.
Oh yeah.
But if you don't lay out the roadmap from FSD, I mean,
Right.
me and you talked about. I mean, autonomous
Oh
is
yeah.
obviously it's
Yeah.
the golden goose. Optimus, Doja, like give us sort of medium long term framework way to think about it.
Right. And I guess, as always, you can say these are forward looking, the company can always cover its legally, just go like, these are forward looking statements. We can't guarantee any of this, but this is what we see, and just try to explain it a little more clearly, I guess is what you're saying. Yeah.
If anyone's like visited colleges
Right.
like with their kid, and let's say you did like the tour where
Right.
you're the standard parents with the kid, like the awkward tour, and then every time someone asks a question, the tour guide's like, "You'll have to see. I know you. I know you're interested in the program, but you'll. No, I know you're interested about dorms, but you'll see what
Yeah.
happens
Yeah.
if you get." So I'm just saying, like, there's there, and also there's a part where like being the kind of rogue anti, it worked for many
Right.
years,
Right.
and it's historical what they've done.
Right.
But yeah, but also remember, like we're in a different phase of the story now.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what worked when you're like a teenager
Right.
doesn't work when you're 35.
Right.
I'm just trying to say is like that's the difference where they are in the
Exactly.
story.
Right. And we can layer into that. I mean, they said it in the earnings call that, and it's pretty obvious, they're in between two growth phases right now, because they had the Model 3, Model Y ramp, and that was huge and it was gigantic. And then eventually, whatever the hell they call this car, the next gen car, whatever it is, that's going to happen and should, double, triple, quadruple the number of cars that they're selling if it goes to plan. But right now they're in between those two stages. So it becomes even more important maybe to like tell the story well right now.
But and the margin. I mean, I go
Mhm.
back to margins. Like
Yeah.
the reason Tesla, we've never viewed them as an auto company. We view them as disruptive tech.
Right.
But a big reason is like when you have auto gross margins that's 25%,
Right.
and you're going against competition that's in the low teens.
Right.
You have a massive you're treated differently because of your
Right.
margin.
Right.
A software company from a margin perspective is the multiple is treated different than a services company because of utilization. They're going to trade higher, not just because of growth, because of margin. So by not kind of line the sand around margins this year, and look, I
Yeah.
ultimately believe, as we talk, could be conservative in terms of like price cuts but that's why like every little move, and Sawyer always tweets him out, or
Right.
Troy or whatever. It's like then all of a sudden it's like it's over exaggerated because you don't have a guardrail. Like, well, no, company said it
Right.
troughs in 1Q. So
Right.
I'm not as worried about it because I already know, okay, we could have some discounting, but it's going to trough in 1Q. Because then now what you've done is you you've left it open.
Right. Right. Yeah, and I think that again, it's that I like that idea. I mean, not necessarily like roller coaster tracks or something, but like a guardrail. So it's like there's this, but you're laying out these are kind of the minimum and maximum expectations that we have, and as long as we're in that path, wherever we are in that path, it's acceptable. And so don't freak out if things drop a little bit or something like that. Yeah.
And a lot of times, like some investors will be like, well, like neural agents, they'll talk about different technologies
Right.
that Musk is working like for all of mankind. I don't care about stock for all.
Right.
Okay, but it all comes down to like the reason Musk could do everything and he's the richest person in the world uh, is because of Tesla.
Right.
The reason you could build factories is based on the capital and how you've written.
Right.
So to try to say that it's not impact, of course,
Yeah.
it's the hearts and lungs of any public company.
Right. Right.
So I just think sometimes there's, and I get it, right? Like people, like they have different views, but as a public company with shareholders,
Right.
you, the reality is like you have obligations and legal and the school that are just held to a different standard.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Interesting. So, yeah, and I've heard a lot of pushback afterwards, and they're like, "Oh, there's people online who are just like, nope, nope, Tesla shouldn't offer any guidance. That's the responsibility of these companies, like your company, and etc." And but I think you're making a reasonable argument on the other
Let the
hand.
analysts
Yeah,
figure it out themselves.
exactly,
Like,
exactly.
don't spoon feed it,
Yeah,
stuff like
yeah.
that.
You've heard all the lines, but I mean, I think it sounds like you're
But
making a
but
good
but
counter
it
argument to that.
goes back
Yeah,
to like every the path to build a championship in football. There's a certain formula,
right.
and it's proven out through the last 20 years. World Series, same thing.
Exactly.
Like college football, same thing. So to be like, oh, we're not, no, we're not going to focus on the quarterback. We're going to focus on special teams.
Right.
You could do that, but that is the reality of this market.
Right.
And the thing is that, and also, even if you look back in the last few years, they gave guidance.
Right.
They remember this goes back to like think about Tesla since Zach left in
Yeah.
August.
Yeah. Yeah. It's been. I mean, I think you're the one who said there needs to be an adult in the room, and it's like Zach was the adult in the room. He was there. So, and anyway, I don't know. So
But
yeah,
that's
go ahead.
also why I talk about it
Right.
a lot because the goal is like when I'm like Tesla's one of my favorite long term names where I
Right.
believe this thing could go from a valuation from 10 years from that. It's something like if you walked out of like iPhone event when we're there in
Right.
'07 with
I
Jobs
did.
and someone told you where you'd be in
Yeah.
23 and 24, you'd be like, how's that even possible?
Right.
But need to get through this period,
Right.
transparency. So to be like a fan and then just rose colored glasses, like that doesn't help.
Right.
So I'm going to always communicate. Like if I'm hearing from hundreds of investors institutionally and I hear what they're saying,
Right.
I'm going to communicate that.
Yeah. And you could make an argument for, most of my channel is retail investors, I think. And so We don't hear the institutional investors, obviously, because a lot of that's communication that would be something that you would have access to, but not directly us. So you're communicating that to the broader audience when you talk to whatever media outlet it is. You're saying, look, this is what people are
But even
thinking.
like
Yeah,
Palantir, like
yeah,
Palantir, when I like we got Super Bowls, in the last
yeah,
year, and it was a huge retail and like
yeah,
I talk to retail all the
right,
time, like on podcast, and be like, look, here's institutional needs. This is, and I tell Palantir as well.
right.
So then when all of a sudden this quarter, that was the aha moment. That was it.
Yeah,
Stock goes from 15 to 25. Like the
right,
point is like it's important to understand that. And I think that's we serve a purpose too because in terms of like I get so much out of the retail,
right.
not just in terms of knowledge, interaction, but also sometimes it's like connecting the dots a little too.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, I got you. So I'll take a tangent for just a second. I want to talk about kind of longer term stuff and FSD and Optimus and all that. But if not Tesla, what other like stocks are you like hot on right at the moment? Just personally, not or
I mean, a
professionally.
lot of it's really around AI. I
Yeah,
mean, we're
yeah, yeah,
just that theme
yeah.
from NVIDIA to SMCI to Microsoft to Palantir to Mongo.
Right.
I mean, I believe like this AI revolution is as big as anything I've seen
Yeah.
in 30
Yeah.
years.
It's kind of exciting. It's pretty crazy. So well,
Well, it
yeah.
is.
Yeah, good.
It's very exciting. Like it's it's a we talk to so many like the actual buyers, like CIOs, CTOs.
Right.
Look, and I think this is gonna the use cases like it's gonna change industries. I think a lot of people underestimate. A lot of times people think like the bad side, right? Like oh, jobs
Right.
but I actually think it's gonna create so much good
Yeah. Yeah.
too.
I think so too. I mean, I better because I own a small startup company that's in the AI space, and it's like that's we're aiming to make life better, and actually we're looking to hire a bunch of people as we get more money. So it's like hopefully that is a tide that lifts people, not rejects them. Um,
Well, and also innovation,
yeah,
everything.
yeah.
Yeah.
And it's exciting. It's a little bit more than a little bit scary, but it's also exciting. So let's skip over FSD for a second because we were talking about jobs. Let's talk about like Optimus. So and also Sanctuary, Agility. I mean, you figure on and on and on. There's lots of robot companies that are coming up, and there's rumors that OpenAI wants to get into that too. That Sam Altman's looking at $7 trillion, which is like mind blowing. But anyway, we've I've been calling 2024 the year of embodied AI. That we're going to see this AI, the brains and the brawn, of these robots. So, what is your vision? What is your sort of take on? I don't know. Let's say by January or February of 2025 and then 2030, 2035, what kind of steps do you see happening with this? Is this that big of a revolution? It sounds like you're already saying that, but yeah, but go into more detail.
Well, I think right now, because the revolution right now is on enterprise.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
Like the use cases are just, and we have 80 use
Right.
cases today. We had less than 20 4 or 5 months ago. So I think that's
It's
so
crazy.
that's why right now at the enterprise is frontline,
Right.
from chips to software.
Yeah.
When you start talking about the other parts of AI on the consumer side, we're going to see from Apple, Google, Meta,
Right.
and then when you think about Tesla from an AI, from an FSD, and what that could ultimately do to that whole ecosystem. I mean, I think look, the big thing in terms of you talk about robotics
Right.
and Optimus. Look, I think the big thing is like what that's going to do to factories,
Right.
what efficiency is going to, what that's going to do to the cost drivers. I think those are from a Tesla perspective, and then a big focus is like okay, like FSD, is that something that Tesla then ultimately is going to OEM out?
Mm,
Like that's
yeah.
similar to like supercharger
Right.
in terms like they build it, others are going to come.
Yeah. I you may or may not be able to say, but certainly from a speculative point of view, it seems like Jim Farley, the CEO of Ford, and Elon Musk are fairly close, and so they would be the logical
Definitely.
first mover in that area.
And Farley, look, I think Farley's been great
Oh
in
yeah.
terms of
Yeah.
just like
Yeah.
recognizing
Yeah.
like the voids, the reality.
Right.
And I think that's been important.
And I think Ford is very lucky to have him. I think he's, it's sort
Yeah.
of like Herbert Diess before he was at VW. It felt like he was a really good leader there. But unfortunately, we don't have to get into the insane ownership structure of VW. But that was a very big blockade to him being able to do what he wanted to do. But he clearly had the right vision. He was thinking the right way. Yeah.
No, and Farley, I think the communication's
Oh yeah.
been great. I mean, laid out, but I think as we're seeing, like, just like, look, there's so much shifts going on
Right.
right now in the industry.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a lot of interesting stuff. So there's let's cast forward, let's say 5 years to 2030 or so. A lot of concern from just normal people, including myself to some extent, is, oh no, we're going to lose all our jobs. What is your take on that? Like, we can start in the factory, but we can also talk about more creative work, blue collar, white collar jobs. Like, what do you think about that?
Well, I think what essentially it's going to do is that, I mean, it's well known, like, manufacturing in the US, it's not booming, right? Like,
Right.
in other words, like, from a services based industry,
Yeah.
like, you're essentially like changing like the jobs that are created
Right.
in the US. I mean, look, it starts like in the Inflation Act and everything that's trying to happen, but I mean, I view this as something that's actually a net job creator
Okay. Okay.
in the US. And you're essentially, I think you're changing the workforce over time.
Okay. That's a
And
really interesting take on this. Okay, I love that. That you're looking at not.
that's
Yeah.
my look, that's my take, just traveling around the world and
Right.
seeing different things. It's a lot of times like I'll be places in the US and like where there used to be
Right.
factories, a lot of like blue collar worker, like union factories closed down, stuff like that outsourced.
Right.
Okay, so it's like what happens to those people, right? Like it's like and there's towns where like population was 20,000, now the population's like 1,000.
Right.
The point is that when you think, some of it's like idealistic, but
Right.
when you look at AI, and for the first time, really in 30
Yeah.
years, the US is ahead of China.
Right.
There's nothing to question when it comes to AI
Right.
technology. Now, our biggest asset in the United States is our technology industry,
Right.
from Apple to Microsoft to NVIDIA and everything else, to leveraging it. I mean,
Yeah.
so I'm a fan and I'm a believer that AI is actually it's a net job creator, but in terms of this shift,
Right.
it's going to create a different type of skilled worker
Okay. Yeah.
in the US.
Okay. That's interesting. And I think I don't know if I have my numbers exactly correct, but there's somewhere around 1 million unfilled jobs right now in the US
Yes.
alone. And so and the 3Ds, the dirty, dull, and dangerous, that those tend to not be jobs that people want. So that seems like the low-hanging fruit. If you can do these dirty, dull, dangerous jobs and have robots, humanoid or other form factors, be able to do those jobs, that seems like a net positive. Yeah.
And in an efficient
Right.
way that those are not being outsourced to Indonesia,
Yes, exactly.
India, Vietnam.
Right. Yeah, it's a way of re-onshoring things. Because I think the big problem, of course, economically is, and I've talked to many business owners, they're like, look, if it costs me half the price, if I can make this pen for this pen for 50 cents instead of a
Yeah.
dollar, I have to send it out to Indonesia or something. I have to make it there to be competitive. But if a robot can do it for 50 cents inside the country, then you'll do it here. Yep.
And I think that's where it's all headed. And then just going back to Tesla, like it's my view that like so it's like our view on Apple was always like if you go back like Nokia, BlackBerry,
Right.
they had 1 billion
Oh yeah.
users. But the reason they went away is hardware, users, nothing kept them in the ecosystem. They couldn't further
Right.
monetize. When you look at services, and that was always, that the services ecosystem within Apple was the game changer.
Right. Right.
You're talking about like 100 billion
Yeah.
annually per year. So this, what the services is to Apple is how I view FSD
Okay.
and AI to Tesla.
Okay.
It's not about $40,000 vehicle.
Right.
That's not what you're paying for. It's the software, it's the technology within it, the subscription,
Right.
and then ultimately that's something that you're gonna be able to own out. And then you think about the amount of data, miles driven.
Right. Right. Which is something that obviously, I mean, the big advantage of the Apple ecosystem is that it's the Apple ecosystem. I'm talking to you on a computer that's an Apple computer. I've got my iPhone. I've got my Apple Watch. I had a
Yeah.
Vision Pro. I ended up returning it. I don't know what you think. What do you think about the Vision Pro? Just to take a momentary.
So I have a Vision
Yeah.
Pro.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a big fan of it because of especially watching movies,
Right.
content. I view it for like plain leisure.
Right.
I mean, the technology is off the chart,
Yeah.
but it is, I've always talked about.
Yeah.
And now you'll see people like, oh, these people are like returning
Right.
it. Originally, we had 300,000 Vision Pro units.
Right.
Today, it's
Yeah.
600,000.
Yeah.
Just think about the number.
Yeah.
So, in 2 years from now, those are going to be
Right.
$1,500, and they're going to look like
Yeah.
sunglasses.
Yeah. Yeah, I made a joke about that. I put on a pair of sunglasses and took a picture and posted on X. I was like, "Hey, Gen 5, Vision Pros," and that's kind of what they're gonna look like.
No,
Yeah.
but that's what Apple
Right.
does, and this is really more for
Yeah.
developers.
Yeah, exactly. And that was, I mean, in my mind, I was like, I'm going to return it because I know there'll be some refurbs that'll be available. So if I want to purchase it again, I could probably get it for $500 discount with the
Yeah,
refurb. So but I think that Gen 2, and if we can use the iPhone as a guide, it was really the iPhone 3G, the third gen, that was when the App Store came online. That was when the phone really came together, where it wasn't cobbled together parts, but actually purpose built parts for it. And so that was the moment.
and we believe they're going to have like eventually like an AI app store. I know folks
Yeah.
talk about
Yeah.
WWDC, and then everything we're hearing from Asia is that from a memory perspective, iPhone 16 will have exclusive LLMs built in.
Wow. Yeah. This has been something that Apple's been kind of a dark horse about. Or not, that's not the right way to put it. They've been very quiet, and they've been doing kind of a classic Steve Jobs move where he doesn't, he didn't invent the computer mouse. He didn't invent the GUI and stuff like that, but he waited until it was good enough, and then he took it and said, "Oh, we can market this thing. That we can package this up in a new way and make it customers really happy with this." And I purchased the first Macintosh back in 1984. I was a college
Yep.
student. I spent every penny that I had on that thing. It was like
Oh,
$5,000 or so. It's an insane amount of money. So, the Vision Pro, yeah.
yeah.
So yeah, it's good stuff. It's very exciting.
But it speaks to like it's such an exciting time.
Right.
Now sometimes like stocks could overshoot on the excitement
Right.
in the near
Right.
term. And then if they sell off, people mistake it as like, oh, it was hype.
Right.
Like, no, like when a stock goes up like 10x and it comes down 20%, it's an adjustment. So, but look, for Tesla, like we're definitely going through, I won't call it white knuckle period,
Right.
but we're going through like a transition where I view this as more from an opportunity, from at least from owning the stock, but more like it's a little blip
Right.
in the broader
Yeah. Yeah.
trend.
And I think that goes back to what you were talking about earlier. Now is the time when a good narrative and some clear guidance is very helpful. If they were just producing their next gen vehicle and making 4 million cars a year and selling every one of them, then people aren't going to complain about the narrative. They're going to be like, "Holy crap, this thing's going crazy." But right now we're in that kind of flat spot between these two, and so that's when the guidelines and the narrative
But
helps.
when you're on an
Yeah.
airplane, the pilot doesn't really
Yeah.
talk, but if you hit crazy
Right.
turbulence, he comes
Yeah.
on.
Yeah.
Like I'm just trying to say,
Yeah.
like it's the same concept. And again, I'm not saying like handhold,
Right.
but you need to give
Yeah.
guardrails.
Yeah. Kind of, yeah, I like that analogy, actually. You're really good with those analogies, that, that's sort of like you are like the pilot of the airplane. And it's like when you hit some turbulent air, you need to come on and calm everybody down and say, "It's all good. We got this, it's cool."
Of
Yeah.
course, and not in like a Ted Stryker
Yeah. Yeah.
moment, right? Like in other words, like it's one of those where it's
Right.
important.
Yeah. Okay. I like that. So speaking of that, I'm sure your company thinks a lot about this, but what about the key man risk with Elon Musk? First of all, is he more, in your mind, more of a net positive than a net negative with Tesla specifically?
70% of the
Yeah.
value
Yeah.
is
Okay.
Musk.
So what would happen if he just rage quit, just said, it's not worth it anymore. Whatever the reason why, what would happen if he left?
So it's 95% of his net
Yeah.
worth is in Tesla. So it's just look, there's always key man
Right.
risk, but I could go that Jensen is key man risk in Nvidia.
Right. Yeah.
Cook, Nadella,
Yeah.
we used to sue at AMD. I mean, I could go. I'm not. Maybe obviously it's more
Right.
here, but I think with the generational type of stories, yeah, you always have
Right.
that.
Right.
Is there Jamie Dimon, JP
Yeah.
Morgan? Is there
Yeah.
a key man?
Yeah.
I'm just saying, like, I feel like it. Everyone sometimes acts like, oh, it's just like Tesla. I mean, but yeah, but look at all these other
Yeah.
companies.
Yeah. And they all do have that. And one could argue that that happened when Steve Jobs unfortunately passed away, that there was a significant key man risk with him. And yet Apple, I don't know what the multiple is right now versus, 15 years ago, but it was, or 14 years ago, whenever that was, it was a lot.
But
Yeah.
Cook was a disciple
Oh
of
yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Jobs, and that's why it's
Right.
important, right, to groom those
Exactly.
disciples.
So, and fingers crossed that that is going on behind the scenes, just in case. Not only there, but with SpaceX, Neuralink, he's kind of more out of it. But SpaceX, I think he's really there. But Gwen Shotwell she's a really nice balance to Elon Musk in that situation.
I
Yeah,
agree.
yeah. And I wish that SpaceX was publicly traded, but but
And look, and I do think it's also possible, as we've talked about, that at one point there could be a holding structure,
right, right,
where in some form you own SpaceX, you own X,
right, right.
you own Tesla. I mean, that's definitely something that's
Yeah.
possible at one
Right.
point.
Yeah, and possibly through some form of ETF or something like that in the meantime. So, let me. I want to be respectful, and I know you've got to go in a few minutes, but I want to touch on what are the biggest threats to Tesla specifically right now. I have one word in mind for me, but I'm curious what you think.
Yeah. So what's
My
your
word is
word?
China. I
Of
yeah,
course. I mean, that's always the like it's if you wake up at 3 in the
yeah,
morning, you're sweating, you're like that's what you worry
right,
about, right? I look, and that's no different for Apple,
yeah,
same thing.
yeah,
But like, I think it's China in two ways. It's not from a production
hmm,
perspective. It's just that economy is so
right,
important to Tesla, and I think, and then I go a step further. Like what I worry about, and Musk was talking about it, is just like look, everyone that watches knows, like Chinese, like they'll just cut and cut,
right,
like they will cut price, and that the undercutting is what I worry about. Look, because it gets to a point like if I'm selling coffee for five
right,
dollars, $4, and then you come next to me and kind of like the Larry David episode, and then all of a sudden like you start selling it at a
right.
dollar. Like I can't make money,
Yeah.
right? Like so eventually you get to a point.
Yeah, where you're just like, it's not worth it. That actually kind of comes back a little bit to the Optimus argument too, which is that it's difficult in the United States to re-onshore manufacturing because the expectation, we just saw the UAW strikes to get more money out of the big three automakers. And, so they're getting a lot of money, whereas you just literally don't have to pay a Chinese worker as much, and they will probably work more hours for that amount of money.
And also anyone that's ever like myself, I mean, we go there often. Like when you go to those factories, you leave there being like,
Yeah.
whoa.
Yeah.
Like, and I always tell people, like a lot of times I go down to DC, like once a quarter, meet with politicians. They go, we should bring it here, the iPhone, like the
Right.
typical. I'm like, look, man, if you like $3,000
Exactly.
iPhones, we should make them in New Jersey. If you like $1,000 iPhones that are
Right.
phenomenal,
Yeah.
made in China.
And it's really interesting because, of course, China. I think you're probably of the same age as me, but I remember when Japan had this reputation in the '70s of being like, "Oh, it's cheap crap and stuff," and then all of a sudden it's like, no, they make. And now Japanese watches, Japanese cars. That's like a high standard. Same thing is happening with Chinese. It was like, oh, they just make cheap crap. It's a knockoff, but they very very cleverly built everything up, and now their
Well,
cars.
look, I think
Yeah.
like when you get in like a
Right.
Neo,
Right. Yeah.
Xpeng, some of those cars. Now again, I'm like, and this is not a zero
Right.
sum game. Like
Right.
many could be bent. I mean, look, they've done, obviously
Right.
BYD. I mean, they've done a great job. But this is like when you look at EVs, you're still in the first, second
Yeah.
inning.
Yeah, exactly. So so I mean, obviously that's the kind of thing that probably keeps Elon up at night. What do you think the odds of the big 3 US automakers are, and maybe the German automakers too versus this? Because, if Tesla is duking it out and they are clearly, at the very forefront, cutting edge of technology and pushing as hard as they can, what are these other guys doing? Because they just.
But that's why you've seen them take
Yeah,
step
yeah, yeah.
backs. Like Ara, Farley,
Right,
Stellantis. They're like, look, like we're gonna go, but hybrid,
right.
and maybe like we don't go fully all in. And the UAW
Right.
situation, like it also, like especially on Ultium and GM, like it has
Yeah,
forced the hand
yeah.
a bit.
Wow, it makes it. I mean, that seems like a good short-term strategy, but I don't really see the long-term success of that because you've got to make the transition at some point. Yeah.
That's why I think for those guys, I think
Right.
hybrid and some special EV model selectively will be the
Gotcha.
success. First, you don't want to alienate your
Yes,
base,
exactly.
right? Like it's like that. I mean, GM sells 7.8 million
Yeah,
cars a
yeah.
year. So the point is like, and the big thing is the
Right.
dealers, right? I mean, if you look at Ford, like dealers are
Yeah,
epicenter.
exactly. Yeah, very true. Okay, so we've got like 2 more minutes here. I managed to not get to FSD, but let's talk FSD specifically. When do you think the first well, let's do 2 things. Number 1, the first place or first time that FSD will be allowed to drive you if you own a Tesla that you can take your hands off the wheel and look at your text messages or something. When is that gonna happen? And then second, when's the first, robotaxi-like ride in a Tesla going to be available? Where.
So 26 is where we
Okay.
believe FS, what you talked about in terms of like that will be depending on the
Yeah, yeah.
state when we're going to get there, and obviously has to get through regulatory and
Right.
everything. And then robotaxis is we view that as like 28
Okay.
to 30. That's sort
Okay,
of our view.
cool. So which is more conservative.
And
That's
it, and
nice.
it's also like when
Yeah.
Kathy, a lot of times talks like robotaxis and everything, like, and that is a bit, like that vision will be a reality.
Right. Right.
But in the near term, it's just like before you get that, you have to just when you go through periods like this, you got to
Right.
handhold.
Right. Yeah, so it loops back to what we were talking about right at the beginning, which is that you just have to when you have those turbulent moments, the captain has to come on and say everything's cool. It's all good. The airplane's built to take the turbulence and everything's going to be fine. So.
But it goes back to like you think Chiefs in that front office before the run with Mo, like they went season ticket holders, everything. Like the point, I'm just trying to
Yeah.
explain, like everyone goes through those periods, and you just navigate through those periods so you could get to the
Right.
golden
Right.
periods.
Exactly. There we go. Well, that sounds good to me.
Yeah, and seriously, I'm so glad this
Yeah,
worked
me too.
out, and
This is awesome.
and I look forward to doing
Awesome.
it
Thank you
again
so much.
soon.
Thank you, everybody.
And you
And
do great work.
obviously, I'll leave your contact info in the description. And if anybody has questions or anything, get in
Yeah,
touch. Yeah.
Twitter, lovers,
Yep.
haters, hit me. Doesn't
That's right.
matter.
Love or hate, Dan is there, and you'll have your awesome clothes on too. And a big thanks once again to Delete Me for sponsoring today's video. Be sure to check out my link in the description to get 20% off any consumer data protection plan. Thank you so much, and we'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.
Thanks.